Now that we've dissected the word libertarian, you may be wondering, what are the real-world implications of this particular philosophy? What does libertarianism look like as a political movement? To answer these questions, we're going to discuss various types of libertarian movements throughout history and how these movements have made an impact on the world. So let me give you some historical examples of particular individuals and how they responded to the kinds of social movements that were operating in the background of their time period. One good example is somebody like Alexis de Tocqueville. Imagine that you're an active politician in your country. That's de Tocqueville, right? And suddenly you decide to travel to what was then the new country of America, the new United States of America, right? And it's built on something that is very different from the political institutions that were operating in France at the time. De Tocqueville was from France. In de Tocqueville's mind, he thought that democracy was an equation that balanced liberty and equality, right? That it raised legitimate concerns both for the individual as well as for the community. So there he was in America, right? And during his time, he recognized and he saw and he witnessed many different characteristics or aspects of liberty as a kind of primary value. That was his interpretation, anyways, of what was going on in America at the time. And he soon realized, and he realized rather quickly, that a centralized government excels in preventing, not doing, right? Centralized government is really good at stopping people from doing certain things, but it's not particularly good at getting people to do stuff, right? So de Tocqueville noticed in America at the time that when there was a problem, people would form all of these, basically clubs. They would form these, let's fix the road club. They didn't send a note to their local politician, say, hey, there's a pothole in the road, fix it. No, they didn't do that. If there was a problem, like a pothole in the road, they all got together and they would fix that pothole together, right? So they would find out what was going on in the local area, fix the problems locally and together. And this wasn't something that was very common in France at the time. Okay, so that's de Tocqueville, but let's talk about the 19th century Austrians. Ludwig von Mises was an actual Austrian. Nowadays, we call all of the economists in that tradition, we call them Austrian economists because that's where the idea originated, right? So they started a fight with mainstream economic methodology as it was during their time period. One of the important things that they defended was the idea that we should do social science via the individual. Rather than through history or rather than through groups, we should focus on the individual as the unit of analysis for purposes of understanding what's going on around us for purposes of social science, right? So that was one of their important innovations. And where they really cut their teeth was during the socialist calculation debate. Ludwig von Mises participated in that, but so did one of his preeminent students, right? The Nobel Prize winner, Friedrich Hayek. He made his career by talking about the socialist calculation debate, by explaining why socialism, it's not just that it's not appealing from a moral perspective. He also argued that socialism was actually practically impossible, right? Socialism was on the rise in Europe during Hayek's time, and what Hayek effectively did is he argued that market prices reflect information. So we get a lot of information. When you go to the supermarket and you see the price tag, there's a lot of information that is contained within that price. You and I, we don't have to know that something happened in West Virginia and now the price of coal is much higher. We don't have to know that something happened in West Virginia to respond reasonably and rationally to it. All we need to know is that the price of coal is higher today than it was yesterday. And when we see that the price of coal has gone up even a little bit, we respond to that by altering our behavior. We economize. For a socialist, the central planner needs to know what has happened in West Virginia, needs to know in order to readjust the entire economy, right? They need to know that. And Hayek and Mises argued that the economy is just too big. There's just too much for any single planner to know, and that's what made socialism kind of impossible. Okay, so that gives you a taste of like Austrian economics. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about public choice theory as another illustration of the evolution of libertarianism. The idea for public choice theory is really simple. Economics as a whole was heading more and more towards a kind of decision theory model, a rational choice theory kind of approach. And some political scientists saw an opportunity for a kind of crossover. And what they did is they applied the tools of economics, which was, assessing the individual choices of individual human beings as though they were self-interested. This is, by the way, really important. No contemporary economist claims that people are in fact self-interested. Instead, they model the economy as though people are self-interested and see what kind of results we might get. So what these political scientists and public choice theory economists did is they applied that insight to the world of politics. They said, why don't we model politics in the way that we model the market behavior of consumers and producers? So here the idea is that we should think about politicians as self-interested, and we should think of them as trying to get elected in the first place or re-elected. So that's what they're aiming towards, either election or re-election. And if we make that assumption about politicians, what kind of predictions will we make? Because notice that like prior to public choice School of Economics, and in fact, even to this day, the way that a lot of people conceive of politicians is they think of them not as self-interested, but as like altruistic. Somebody wants to be president, and we say, good for you, you must really care about the public good, and so on and so forth, right? Notice that you would make very different predictions about the behavior of politicians and the behavior of people within a political context if you assume self-interest as compared with a regard to the public good. And so Public Choice School of Economics uses the assumption of self-interest and makes different kinds of predictions. In my judgment, those predictions are much better than the ones that are based on, maybe the unicorn fantasy that like politicians want what's best for all of us, right? Okay, so as we've seen from a look at the history of the concept liberal as well as the evolution of libertarianism, not historically, but kind of giving you three concrete examples of the academic evolution of libertarianism through public choice theory, the Austrian School of Economics, as well as de Tocqueville's little adventure in the United States. I hope you've seen that like libertarianism has become much more robust over time, right? And it's birthed a lot of different social movements, different kinds of campaigns, and different kinds of protests. We're gonna focus a lot more on those social movements in the next few videos. We're gonna bring in my buddy Professor Chris Fryman, and he's gonna talk to you about social justice from a libertarian perspective, and he's gonna do that by invoking two of my biggest heroes, namely John Brown and Frederick Douglass.